So welcome back. I'm really glad you came back. This part of the work where we're working through the kinds of things that can absolutely block our dreams is actually the thing that sometimes blocks people. So good for you that you're hanging in here and you're coming down to these lessons and you're listening. And more than that, I hope you're applying these things because you will absolutely begin to experience a whole new kind of energy. You'll experience a feeling of liberation. You'll start to have new ideas. Things will start being attracted to you. So this is an essential part of the work in having your dream have the nourishment of your mind, your resources, your energy that's required to actually bring about your dream. So good job coming back. In the last lesson, we started thinking and considering the power of forgiveness, why we would forgive, and who forgiveness is really for. And the truth is, of course, it's not for the other person, it is for ourselves. Betrayal is tough. Betrayal just stirs these strong feelings in us, and it compels us to take a stand. How am I going to consider this? What am I going to do with this? Am I going to let this erode my self-esteem, my thoughts, my patterns, my plans? And we have to ask ourselves, what is the stand I'm going to take? Because here's the truth. It's all in the frame we bring to the experience. The difference between a victim's journey and a hero's journey is the frame we make around the experiences we have. A victim's journey is one story after another about what happened to them. A hero's journey is one story after another about how they transform circumstances into empowerments. So forgiveness is not something you do once and it's over. We forgive a bit at a time, and remember, forgiveness is to give for one perspective, a much higher order perspective. It changes the way we look at things because the way we look at things changes. So you might have been thinking, okay, I would like to forgive, but, if she only knew what happened to me. I mean, lots of people can forgive, but this particular thing, this is really tough, and frankly, it might be tough. But I can promise you this, over the years of working with thousands and thousands of people, there is hardly a story I haven't heard. And what I know is the content of the story is malleable to the thinking that we bring to it. So no matter how horrific, how awful, or how small it is, the thing that just bugs you or hurts you, or whenever you think of it, you just feel this constriction. The opportunity here is that you really can bring the power of forgiveness to that circumstance. It does not change your past, but it not only changes your present, it absolutely transforms your future. I had a wonderful mentor once. His name was Jack Boland. He was a phenomenal speaker and teacher and business leader, and his work was in the Detroit, Michigan area. Many of the friends I have, Wayne Dyer and Bob Proctor and others, knew Jack as well. And he had made a big difference in their lives as well. So Jack one time was asking me about something I wanted to create, and he said, "Do you believe you can do this?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure." And he said, "Mary, I'm absolutely convinced you can do this. Now believe in my belief." And I made a choice to do that. That believing in his belief really helped me transform my thinking about what was possible. He was a spiritual man, Jack Boland. But that wisdom did not just drop down on him. This kind, benevolent, compassionate guy became who he was in part because of how much he had had difficulty and then overcome that difficulty. There was a guy in his life, a former brother-in-law, that through the circumstances of their life and some real tough things that the brother-in-law had done, earlier in his life, Jack had just developed this loathing for his former brother-in-law. He despised him. And Jack told me when he was telling me the story of the transformation, he said, everybody I told about the things this guy had done to me, they totally agreed. I mean, this guy was a real jerk. I mean, all I had to do was tell the story and I could get anybody to say, "Oh my gosh, is that really what happened to you? That's horrible." Now, what we find in forgiveness is sometimes, hey, I don't want to give up my victim story, because as long as I hang on to my victim story, I can get anybody I want to agree with me how awful it's been for me. And there's this kind of odd support and almost an odd good feeling in having a group of people, almost anybody you want to talk to about it, just go, "Oh my gosh, you really had it rough." So isn't it horrible that thing happened to you? and you actually have positive reinforcement then for keeping your story. So Jack said that he told this story so many times, and so many people validated that story about how awful it was, that ultimately he had to come to a different spot inside his own mind. And he realized that this particular part of his life and his version of it and his story about it was actually holding him back from all he could be. So every time he thought about the brother-in-law, even though Jack's sister and the man had long since divorced, the pain and the problems persisted, not for them, but for Jack. And as he moved into a larger expression of his life, as he began to want to build great dreams in his life, he said that he moved into practicing the principles for living, the laws of life, that were in accord with, in alliance with, in harmony with the laws of abundance, the laws of happiness. And he ultimately had to say to himself, I'm going to have to forgive this. Not because the former brother-in-law deserves it, but because I want the liberation. But Jack had no idea how to forgive it. And that really may be where you are right now. I know it's at times where I've been, where something happened and you just don't know how to let it go. So Jack told me, as he told me the story, he said that he'd heard about a possibility that you could actually visualize that person in your mind and then shower that image with love. And that over time, he was told, the toxic thoughts recede, the hurt melts in the presence of this love, and he thought, okay, great, I'm going to do that. So he would visualize the brother-in-law, and he would think about love and wait for that loving feeling to well up in his heart. And then he would see his brother-in-law's nasty, conniving little face, and boom, there went the love. I mean, he just couldn't feel love in the presence of the image of the brother-in-law, and he was being very honest about that. I appreciated that. So back came the resentment. Whenever he imaged his brother-in-law, well, he did not experience love. He imaged the brother-in-law, and he would have resentment and contraction, and so that particular technique was not helpful for him. So Jack really did want to forgive. And over time, he found a way to do that. Because what he began to recognize that whenever he held images of people he really did love, like his son, when he would imagine his son as a little boy, he just had nothing but this overwhelming, free-flowing feeling of love. And as that love would begin to be generated in his heart, and as he would amplify the feeling of the love, he would then slip into his mind the image of the former brother-in-law. And immediately, of course, there would be a contraction and a de-amplification of the frequency of love. But he found over time that bringing the brother-in-law's picture in his mind into a field of already generating love, it became easier. And of course, the goal was that any time he would get the picture of the brother-in-law in his mind, he would feel a well-wishing. He wasn't asking of himself that he would love that brother-in-law, like, I'm so, happy and grateful to have this man in my life, but he wanted to neutralize the negativity. He wanted to neutralize the toxicity because he knew that toxicity was not in the brother-in-law anymore. It was in him. He was the one who was carrying that. He was the one who was generating it. And that energy that it takes actually to hold the toxicity and keep that going, even when it's outside your conscious awareness, is energy that can't be directed towards your dream. So when you think about your mind as a computer, what's on the desktop, remember, is what you are conscious of. What's in your files is what is in the subconscious mind. You're not aware of it, but it's there. And if you have a hard drive that has only a certain amount of storage, you have a certain amount of energy you can direct. And so if you're holding a big file full of resentment, that space is not available to be used to create goal sheets and all the kinds of things that could be used for your dream. Now, essentially, it's a similar kind of thing. When you're holding that frequency of resentment, a hurt, betrayal, you get others to agree with you, that frequency is not in harmony with the dream you're wanting to have. So this is about shifting a frequency. It's about releasing the energy that could actually thwart or delay and make difficult your dream. So here's what Jack did. Over time, he found, instead of thinking of the brother-in-law, he would think about his son. Think about the toothless grin, the freckles on his face, and this energy of love that had been in his heart would just expand. And then at the last second, he'd slip an image of the brother-in-law's face in. And that loving energy, of course, would contract, but it wouldn't go away. And as he continued to practice this, he said it was the most amazing thing. Even the shape of the brother-in-law's face began to look different to him. And instead of seeing him through the lens of his own stored resentment, he began to see that brother-in-law differently. Completely amazed Jack. And there came a point when he began to see the image of his brother-in-law as a little boy like his son. Oscar Wilde once said, "The only sane person I know, is my tailor. He measures me anew every time he sees me." And Jack realized that he was measuring this man, his former brother-in-law, by his past experience with him. And as he would hold the image of his own son and have this expanded heart and this feeling of love, over time he slipped his brother-in-law's face in that imagery, and he began to be able to maintain that energy and that feeling. And this was not something that happened for Jack rapidly, like in a week, but he stayed with it. It was just a moment a day. It just took a few minutes a day. And it happened over months, because this was like one of those major things that had stayed with him as a hurt. And he said that he knew the healing was complete when one day he was driving through town, as he often did, and he stopped at a stoplight, and this new Cadillac pulled up right next to him. And he said at first he admired the car, and then he looked at the driver, and the driver was actually his former brother-in-law. And all of a sudden what he felt, Jack told me what he felt when he saw his brother-in-law in this brand new Cadillac, was, "I'm glad for him." He said it was just a knee-jerk reaction. He didn't have to generate that. He didn't make himself think that. He just thought, good, he's doing well. I'm glad for him. And he was amazed at himself. And he knew that he had liberated himself. And no longer did that man have the right to control his life, Jack's life, because of the previous relationship and the previous behaviors. Jack was completely free. There's a Hindu word called namaste. Sometimes it's namaskar. But it's a word that has been used for centuries in India. And what the word really means is the light in me, the spirit in me. The light in me, or spirit in me, recognizes and honors the light or the spirit in you. Does it mean I like everything about your personality, or not that you need to like everything about everybody's personality, but it's a way of seeing that's different. It's a way of holding the recognition of each other as spiritual beings in a human experience, and remembering that the light in me recognizes and honors the light in you. It's a way of saying I can actually see, receive, and really honor that presence and that light in you. And when I'm in that place in me, and you're in that place in you, there's really only one of us here. We're in this one presence, one power, one life. You and I live and move and have our being in it. So does everyone else. We're all part of this quantum field, the, Sheldrake's morphogenic field. It's all one presence, one life. So forgiveness then moves me from separation into connection. It moves me from littleness into greatness. So you and I are not going to build a great dream by living in littleness, keeping a small-minded idea or experience about anything. Namaste. Every one of us here is either expressing love or calling for love, no matter how unskillful our behavior is at the moment we're calling for love. In this practice of forgiveness, we come to recognize that every single one of us does not know the whole story that's behind the acts that are difficult for us to forgive. So let's say that I'm the one who needs to forgive. And I'm needing to forgive because I'm the one who's feeling contracted energy. I'm feeling less alive in the relationship. Whenever I think of this person, my energy goes down. I feel contracted. So what can I do? One time I went to a grocery store. I do it all the time, but this particular time was really life-changing for me. Simple thing, I had a shopping cart full of groceries. The woman at the checkout counter overcharged me for one item by $3. I told her what I thought very politely. I said, that item is not that much. It's this much. And with an exasperated sigh, she took the item out of the bag. She slammed it on the counter. She pulled out the register tape, made this huge production of changing the money, just refunding that little bit of money. Then she was stomping around, and she was really rude. And I kept thinking, well, this was her mistake. It's not mine. And I started judging her. projecting on her, what an awful woman, or my God, she shouldn't be working here. She shouldn't treat people like this. And it's like 25 years ago, but this is the number I'm running inside. This store should hire people who are more polite to their customers if they want their, customers to come back. So there was a young man who was helping bag my groceries, and then he rolled my cart out to the car. And while he was helping me put the groceries in my trunk, I gossiped. And I said to him, I think that was one of the rudest checkers I've ever experienced. She was like rude. And the kid said to me, oh, I know, she's having such a hard day. Yesterday, her only son was riding a bike, and he got hit by a car. He's in the hospital. She's a single mom. She's working today because I know she has to have the money, but I know she's really, really worried about him. Immediately, my anger dissolved. My resentment was gone. And that self-righteous feeling like she's the one who screwed up, not me, that just vanished. Now, I remember driving away and thinking, okay, what just happened there? Because I went from anger to compassion in a flash once I knew the story. And I remember asking myself, so if knowing the whole story, the natural result of knowing the whole story behind behaviors that are unskillful, if the natural result of knowing the whole story is compassion, then is it possible to just move to compassion in the absence of knowing the whole story, knowing that if I did know the whole story, I would naturally feel compassion? So let me say that one more time, because what happened for me is I began to recognize that's true. If, in fact, knowing the whole story, the natural response is compassion, because I believe that for every one of us. In every one of us is innate goodness. Now, learning how to generate the feeling tone that's harmonious with that innate goodness, of course, requires how we use our minds. But as I was driving home, I thought, okay, if the natural response to knowing the whole story in the presence of unskillful behavior is compassion, then is it possible to feel compassion in the absence of knowing the whole story? Yes, it is, by how we think. And so I began to practice that. When I'd find myself in judgment or, and this was a pattern for me at the time, where something would happen and I would bring judgment to my mind. I'd feel reactive. I would feel righteous. And that wasn't the greatest life, but I felt justified in that. It's sort of a common response. And more than that, it was how I was patterned. It was how I was taught to be by parents who were doing the very best they knew how, and that's how they were taught, and how most of the world responds. But it wasn't liberating, and it wasn't freeing, and it wasn't the higher vibration that actually gives rise to an understanding that we're in a sea of abundance. So I just made a decision. And I made a decision that when something happened that was unskillful, whether it was myself or someone else's, whether there was any understanding about what had happened, that I would remind myself that if I knew the whole story, I would feel compassion. So in the absence of knowing that story, I'm going to assume the positive intent of the other person, even though I have no way of understanding how what they just did is in alignment with something that seems positive to them or something that seems appropriate to them given their circumstance. Nevertheless, I'm going to have compassion for them and wish them well. And I began to practice that. And it wasn't always easy, but I began to notice little by little that my life began to move in a different arc. I could track over a couple of years the growth, the expansion, the opportunities, new friendships, all kinds of things began to demonstrate themselves in my life that were in harmony with the patterns of greater compassion and greater aliveness and more fluidity in my life. I heard a story once about a young woman walking through a marketplace, and someone just whacks her on the head with an umbrella, and she just turns around in rage. How dare you hit me with that umbrella? And then what she sees behind her is a blind man who's trying to find his way. Upon seeing that the one who has just struck her is blind, she's just filled with compassion. And that's just another example of what we're talking about here, is that in essence, at times we're all blind. We're blind to how our behavior might affect someone else. We're blind to our own misunderstandings about things. And so we can choose, just naturally, to have a response called compassion. I'm not saying you don't have to exercise that thinking muscle, and you don't have to exercise that freedom to choose that response that brings a feeling tone. But I am saying that if you will exercise that, you will find yourself happier. You will find yourself more creative. You will find yourself on a whole different track. So forgiveness, again, is not something we're just going to do once and then it's over. It's a way of being. It's kind of like you wouldn't take a shower once and that's it. Okay, I took a shower, I'm done. This is a kind of mental, emotional cleaning that we do on a regular basis. Just like abundance is a way of being, scarcity is a way of being, resentment can be a way of being. So you and I choose. Forgiveness, a way of repatterning what we're seeing so that it's in harmony with a feeling of release, recognition, understanding, compassion, that I choose to think this way. I don't have to be around someone who continues to be in patterns that I have to practice forgiveness with, nor will I carry them around like a lead weight in my, a ball and chain in my life. I'm going to set that Harry down. I am not going to carry that. Now, a rude checker or a whack on the head with the umbrella are ultimately not hard things to forgive. Even the little stuff can dampen our aliveness, so until we make forgiveness just a part of our way of being. So we can remind ourselves that the difficult moment will pass, but it's the accumulation of these little resentments that ultimately determine the person we become. And you're in this course. And you're doing this work because you've made a decision for yourself that you want to be a person who has dreams coming true on a regular, repeated, ever upward spiraling experience. A number of years ago, I went to the Human Unity Conference in New Delhi, India. And a number of the delegates had the opportunity for us to have a private audience with the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama took us to this chapel to meditate and to pray. And it's a Baha'i temple. It's marble, and there are 9 lotus petals. Inside each one of those lotus petals is a altar, and 7 of them are to the world's major religions, 1 to the lesser-known religions, and 1 altar is to all the religions yet to come. So the Dalai Lama, he's just an amazing being. He's been ousted from his country over 40 years ago, and the Chinese government has systematically, over those years, sought to decimate the structure of the Tibetan government and their culture in Tibet. And for whatever, again, things we do not understand. But nevertheless, the Dalai Lama's many thousands of his people have evacuated and left the country, left their homes, all the temples have been destroyed, and many of those people that are still in Tibet some of them have been killed or executed or imprisoned for refusing to refrain from public demonstration of their Tibetan faith, which simply, of course, is a way of walking down the street saying Om Mani Padme Hum, which is the equivalent of you or I walking down the street of a city we live in and saying, Our Father who art in heaven. Very, very difficult. And yet this man, this amazing being, he generates compassion. He exudes happiness. It's not that he is not vigorous and works diligently to help his people, to speak to the world, to initiate ways of doing things that could actually return Tibet to the Tibetan people. But he has refused to let that experience dominate his daily awareness or his daily happiness. And it's a great exercise. And later, following this Human Unity Conference, years later, I would have the opportunity to sit 3 times next to him for 5 days at a time while we conducted conversations with world leaders. And I remember asking him, how do you do this? I mean, just to be in his presence. I remember reading scripture one time where the woman just wanted to touch the hem of the garment of Jesus, knowing that if she could just get that close to that kind of energy, it would change her. And that's how I felt being around the Dalai Lama, is like just an amazing transformation of just seeing how he does his daily life, how the quickness of humor, the brightness of wit, the keen intelligence, and the way he is. So when asking him, how do you do this? He said, every one of us has friends. Friends, easy to love. Friends make mistake, even easy to forgive. Then we have what we call sacred friends. Oh, sacred friends, very difficult to forgive. Very, very difficult. He said, Chinese government, my sacred friend. I would never have developed heart. I have developed compassionate heart, absent Chinese government. Chinese government makes so difficult to forgive that I had to get very, very big heart and have to keep very, very big heart. And it's a big challenge. But I will tell you, for the Dalai Lama, the Chinese government, you have a different sacred friend. You may have several sacred friends. And if you can hold the possibility that rather than blaming the sacred friend, regretting the sacred friend, trying to eliminate the sacred friend, holding resentment for the rest of your life for the sacred friend, if you use the sacred friend as a transformative agent, you will find a similar kind of thing. You will find, and I know this personally for myself, I know it for so many people that over the years have made a decision for themselves, that you absolutely will find on the other side of this, no matter what the crime, no matter what the difficulty, no matter what the hurt, you will find a way of being that you will look back not in giving thanks for the actions, but you will give thanks because of your good practice of the spiritual principles. You will give thanks for where this has taken you. You may not wish the experience on anybody else, but you would wish where it took you on everybody else. So in the Lotus Temple in New Delhi, the Dalai Lama taught us a meditation called the loving kindness meditation. And he said, begin with yourself, begin with you. And he says, then say, may I be truly happy. May I live in peace. May I live in love. May I know the power of forgiveness. May I live in recognition that my life has deep meaning, good purpose. Hold that for yourself. May I be truly happy. May I live in peace. May I live in love. May I know the power of forgiveness. May I live in recognition that my life has deep meaning and good purpose. Then you add your close family that you love. And put the name of someone you deeply love. Your child, your spouse, your parent, a friend, someone you deeply love. May they be truly happy. May they live in peace. May they live in love. May they know the power of forgiveness. May they live in recognition that their life has deep meaning and good purpose. And so you can change the words, but you're wishing for them that they live in love, that they live in happiness, that they live in joy, that they live in the recognition of the understanding that there's more to them that they know and that they can live in meaning and purpose. And whatever you pray that is loving kindness, in whatever words you use, bring loving kindness for yourself and for the people you love and care about. And then you extend the field a little wider. And you bring into that field some of the people with whom you've had difficulty. Maybe particularly someone or some circumstance that's been difficult for you. It takes a time of practice to be able to sustain and hold the frequency of that loving kindness in the presence of someone you still have resentment with. But you can over time. So you keep directing this energy of loving kindness to the particular person or the particular circumstance that's been difficult to release. And you're going to actually see a shift in that energy. You're going to actually see the shift that will be such that there is a peace that you will start to feel, and that peace will be a gift to you. And that gift will take the form that you'll have more access to the understanding and the awareness and the abundance that supports your dream. So remember, forgiveness is something you're doing for yourself. This loving kindness practice is used throughout the Buddhist community. It's not really different than some of the practices we find in our Christian faith or our Jewish traditions. It's a way of transforming the mind so that we're liberated, so that we're free, so that we're not toxic. So it's actually, interestingly, the loving kindness practice is a form of forgiveness work. It actually creates a magnetic field in which all good is available to you. You may not understand that yet, but I'm just inviting you to practice it and try it on for yourself. So I'm going to share one last story on the power of forgiveness. Now, it's a true story, a guy I knew named Al. Al was a biker in his youth. He was a guy who got involved in some heavy, dark dealings. He was involved in drugs and stealing cars and doing all kinds of stuff, and he ended up spending some time in jail. And if there was a problem, Al solved it by physical violence. Yeah, I think he spent 2 or 3 years in prison. And while he was there, he decided, well, either I keep doing what I've done and keep getting what I've gotten, or I'm going to change my life. And so he started attending some of the AA meetings in prison. And something really magnificent happened for him. He had a spiritual experience. He began to be aware of a presence that is with all of us. But most of us are not really aware of that presence, this life, and a sense of companionship in this. So Al began to be aware of this. So he got out of prison and he began to change his life. Ultimately, he would meet a young woman, they'd fall in love, and they deeply loved each other. They got married. And everything went really well for about 12 years when things began to change. And then over the next couple of years, there were more difficulties. And then at their 14th year of marriage, they separated. Now, Al wanted very much to get back with his wife, and he was doing everything he could to kind of entice her back into the relationship. And she said, I'm not coming back. The marriage is over. But he believed he could win her back, and he confided his feelings in his best friend, Bruce. And Bruce listened to him and was comforting and consoling. But this went on for 9 months, where Al's talking to Bruce, and Al's former wife is saying, no, I'm done. But Al keeps hoping, and Bruce is being, a confidant and consoling. And then one day, Al finds out that all this while, Bruce has been having an affair with his wife. Al was just beside himself. He was livid. He was so angry, so hurt. And this rage came over him, and all he wanted to do in that old pattern was just revert to his old behavior and go take Bruce out, hammer him hard. But he decided to come and see me and to come ask for some help. And that's really a part of forgiveness also. The human part of us looks at a circumstance and separates everything into good or bad, right or wrong. This human part of us wants to feel resentful. But there's another part of us, our spirit, and it's connected to the power that is the source of all life in this universe, the universe itself as living. And when you look at all the people who have effected long-lasting, durable forgiveness, what they have in common is that they have not done it alone. They knew that there was this inherent divine quality, and that as they made contact with that part of themselves, it empowered them to do something extraordinary. So when you ask for help, you're asking this higher part of yourself to help you see things differently. You're saying, I really do want to see this differently. And you're invoking an awareness that is here for you, for me, but outside the frequency that is constricted by these thoughts of blame, attack, wanting to get back, get revenge. So even though Al felt so betrayed, at a human level, all he wanted to do was get Bruce, take Bruce out, he decided to ask for help. And in saying, I can't do this, I have to find a different way around this, the thought came that he could come and talk to me, which he did. And in listening to his story, I said, Al, there's really only one way out of this. And he said, what? And I said, you're going to have to forgive Bruce. Forgive that SOB? I'm not going to forgive that SOB. I want to take that SOB out. I mean, he really felt that, of course. And I said, well, you're the one who will be not only in a physical prison, should you do this, but even if you do a lesser version of this, you're going to be in a mental prison. It's your choice. How am I going to forgive him? That God, and you can understand. I mean, this was a best friend. It was a betrayal. And of course, at this point, he begins to discover that for the 2 years that things were waning between Al and his wife, Bruce and the wife had been flirting, doing all kinds of things. And Al was just devastated. And that's a very human response. That's not, any of us would have to work through some of these feelings. The point isn't, did Al, have an authentic response to that kind of betrayal? Of course. But to be stuck in that is not liberating. And if you look in the lives of all the great people, Jesus of Nazareth himself, you will find the element of betrayal. Betrayal is part of every great hero's journey. It's not the betrayal, it's what you do with the betrayal. Is the betrayal a defining moment? Because it will define what you do, and what you do will define the direction your life will take. And this was Al's defining moment. So I said, look, here's what you got to do. If you're going to choose forgiveness, you're going to either choose to go into a mental prison or a physical prison, or you're going to choose forgiveness. If you want to forgive, then here's how you can do it. I said, Al, you got to pray for Bruce. Pray for that SOB. I'm not going to pray for that SOB. All I want to do is hurt him. And I said, I understand that, but you still have to pray. Your feelings will change as you do really good thinking about this. So you can begin the prayer any way you want to, but ultimately you want to spend at least a little time, even though you won't feel like it, is just wish him well. Wish that SOB well. And I said, just try it. Just spend a few minutes a day and think of him and say, I wish you well. I hope things go well for you. That same kind of practice with the loving kindness practice. So I said, you can begin the prayer any way you want to, Al, but wish him well. That's what you need to do. Go, just try it on. See what happens. So I said, Al, you can begin the prayer any way you want to, but here's the deal. Pray for his wellness. Pray for his happiness. Pray for his well-being, because that's the energy you want to be living in. You can start the prayer any way you want to. So as Al began praying, he was thinking, okay, I can pray any way I want to. And he left. And he came back a couple of weeks later, and I didn't know what the content of his life was. I didn't know if he'd talked to his wife or Bruce or what had happened, but I knew Al was better. You could just see it all over him. I mean, the rage that was pouring out of him had evaporated, and he was in a whole different state of being. And we sat down and I said, well, how you doing? He says, I'm doing better. And I said, well, what happened? And he says, well, I took you at your word. You said I could begin the prayer any way I wanted to. And so I did pray for him, but here's how I began the prayer. God, if a truck doesn't smash him flat first, may Bruce be happy and do well. And then I began to think, if a train doesn't run him over and cut off his legs, and I actually imaged that, then I would think, okay, well, maybe he could be happy and do well. And he said the energy, of course, was on the harm that would happen to Bruce, but I would always add in the end, maybe he would be happy and maybe he could do well. And he said the honest thing happened, after maybe 8 or 10 days of doing this, the thought actually occurred to me when I said maybe he could be happy and do well. I really did probably want that for him. I mean, he had been my best friend, and there were a lot of traits in him that I respected and things about him that I had liked, and not the fact that he and my wife had been dishonest with me. But if I really loved her, did I not want her to be happy? And he was my friend. I mean, if something was going on between the two of them, even though it hurt me, ultimately, did people you care about, don't you want them to be happy? And he said it began to change for him. He said, the hurt isn't gone, and I'm going to have to find a new life. I'm going to have to find my way. And I'm not quite sure how to do that now. But he said the sting and the horrible feeling and the, wanting to go take him out is gone. I don't have those feelings anymore. And you can just hear and feel the transformation that occurred in a relatively short time in the presence of a very large betrayal. Now, over the next few years, Al's life would go on a whole new arc. Ultimately, he would meet a woman that was so suited for him and he for her, and I got to perform that wedding. But I knew as I stood there performing that wedding, and the look of love, the palpability of their love together, their feeling together, the group that was gathered celebrating this union, Al would never have been able to have this experience if he had carried the resentment, the blame, the victimhood forward. It would have tainted, it would have made toxic every new relationship he had tried to start up. So remember, forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you. So I want to suggest that every single one of us consider that each one of us have some forgiveness work to do. It's a daily practice, where you can just consider, what do I need to release? What would be good to let go of? And something will occur to you. It might be something little, it might be something big. It doesn't matter what occurs to you, but you just make a decision, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the situation, no matter what happened, you begin to generate that loving kindness. You wish well for yourself, and forgiveness of self begins to become part of your daily practice. You're in a human experience. You're going to do things. You're going to say things. You're going to regret things. That's part of our learning process for every single one of us. So to be gentle with ourselves, internally, to be a soft place to fall. that when you fall down, it's a soft place inside yourself, instead of this rigid, ridiculing, blaming, accusatory, internal dialogue, that you become a soft place to fall for yourself. And when there are amends to make and retributions to do, you do them quickly. You say you're sorry. And if you can do it over again, do it over again. But you take the learning and you don't keep repeating the same mistakes. So you can be a soft place to fall. You can also provide a soft place to fall for the other people that are in your life. And when someone does something happens that is just one of those keynote betrayals, one of those things that absolutely are so difficult, we can be heartened by the words of the Dalai Lama, that sacred friends give us the opportunity to expand our hearts. And from an expanded heart, that becomes the place we can have an expanded life. This is true. Try it on.